Well, the new head of Manx Gas seems quite interested in talking to us. He got, to get onto us last time. So maybe this is sort of the thing to clarify, maybe hopefully before Tuesday, or Wednesday, as you say, exactly what is in there. But you'll be there. Will you be watching the proceedings?
I'll be in the gallery. I'll have a look. Yeah, of course I will. Of course I will.
I mean, and whatever happens, if it does get through, that's it, is it? As you say, your job is done. Or how do you feel? You almost didn't come today. You told me before we started this you almost weren't going to
because
come.
it's gone very complicated. We can't just have a little look at this and spend 5 minutes scanning through this. This takes hours to scan through. The other thing that strikes me about this, LPG customers appear to be left out of the initial reductions, including the possible MUA service costs. So in other words, this MUA service cost reduction, they seem to be left out of all of this. So that's not fair on LPG customers. So in effect, we have domestic customers getting some sort of a better deal in the future. We've got commercial customers over 12,000 kilowatt units per year out of this agreement, regulated. And now we're seeing the LPG customers are no longer going to be regulated. So who's going to look after these customers? And of course, and then we go on. The other problem is with this, and this, it's a problem for me, but it's a bigger problem really for gas customers. I mean, I decided yesterday, in order to come down here today to get some facts and some figures, I ran a poll in our group yesterday and asked our members on there quite simply the question: would you prefer at this stage a voluntary deal, or would you prefer the government to impose regulation? Yeah. You've got to bear in mind, of course, Paul, that trust has been minimised, reduced greatly since the start of all of this, both on the part of Manx Gas and the government in the gas customers' eyes. And what we found, or what I found, is that out of a poll of, I think it was 110 people that voted up to the time that I set out to come to see you today, is 4 or 5 people have voted for a voluntary deal. 90 people voted for imposed regulation, and 7 or 8 people voted for a third option, which I didn't include, which was included afterwards by somebody else, that there should be competition introduced into the market. Within this voluntary gas regulation agreement heads of terms, there doesn't seem to be any mention whatsoever about competition. So perhaps competition is now something we should be looking at.
I don't think it's possible. We had this conversation. It's just too small a market, though, isn't it? And they're going to have to use the same infrastructure.
It's not for me to decide, though.
No.
We could say the same thing about Manx Telecom, and Sure. For years people said there was only room for Manx Telecom, and then Sure came along, and there seems to be room in that market. But we also have to ask ourselves a question about this. If this is an agreement, is that legally binding agreement? Mm-hmm. These are all questions for Tynwald. We can go on. The Communication Commission. So to my knowledge, which is a limited knowledge, the Communication Commission is going to become the arbitrator. So the OFT is going to be removed as the regulator, and the Communication Commission is going to be introduced as the arbitrator. Before I came down here today, I contacted the Communication Commission because I wanted to get a better insight into what exactly their position was in all of this. But the Communication Commission seems to be the regulator of telecommunications, of Sure, Manx Telecom, onManx, Blue Wave, I guess, etc., etc. So, from my perspective, this is my own personal viewpoint. The one thing that shined through on all of this for the last 5 years for me was that the OFT were completely out of their depth as regulator for a huge utility company like Manx Gas. So I struggle with the idea now that the Communication Commission is all of a sudden going to be the expert on all things gas utility. You see, me and you have had a conversation many times about what my preference would be on this, and I said to you on so many occasions that I believe we should have had an expert, independent regulator in place. Clearly, nobody in government has taken any notice of anything I had to say about all of that. But at the end of the day, if this is agreed, this is the route they're going to go down. We're looking at the Communication Commission being the arbitrator. Do they have the knowledge? Will they have to employ experts from outside with knowledge of gas utility companies, etc., etc.? Because at the end of the day, the company we're talking about here, Manx Gas, it's a multi-million-pound company. So this is all the stuff.
You got lots more there.
Honestly, it goes on. What happens after 2021? So after 2021, we talk about what happens in 2020 and 2021. There will be reductions. Going back on what we said earlier on, of course, at the minute we don't know how much these reductions are going to be. We don't know when they're going to be paid, how they're going to be paid. But of course, we also know that in government rental properties, whether that be council properties or main government rentals, over time they're going to start pulling oil and gas boilers out of these properties, and in time they're going to be looking at more green methods of heating properties. So clearly, as time goes on, there's going to be less and less and less people using gas, which could in effect mean that the standing charges are going to go up and up and up and up for the few customers that are left. None of this, of course, has mentioned any of this. So where's the protections after 2021? I mean, it goes on. It just depends on how many parts and questions you want me to ask. So on the basis of all of that,
so much you say. Before we finish, because obviously there is so much there, anything else we need to talk on, particularly something that really is a worry to you? I mean, besides all these other things which are adding up massively. Well,
you see, I have to come to a point in time where I have to split my opinion between the administrator of a Facebook group that has 1,900, close on 2,000 members, and me as Barry, who's a gas customer.
Yeah.
And I posted on the group about 4 or 5 weeks ago that from this point on, there comes a point where I have to kind of remove myself as being the spokesperson of the group and be the person who has his own opinion on this. And about 5 minutes ago into this interview, I said to you I ran a little poll on the group because I wanted to see how other people were going to vote.
You took part, did you?
I didn't yesterday, but I did today.
And?
So I worked late last night and I went over and over and over this and drew lines and circles through a whole lot of points and within this. And as I said to you, it's much, much better. But one thing it definitely isn't. It's
so you want statutory, don't you?
I want the imposed regulation route. Do you know what? And it took me a long, long time. I tried to be balanced on this. But because there's so much, again, missing in all of this, the one other key thing is the... when we talk about what's going to happen in 2021 and indeed 2020, we don't know what's going to happen with gas charges moving forward. And we've always said, or I've certainly always said to you, that I believe there should be a tracking mechanism in place. And again, of course, unfortunately, it's all missing in this. And I'd love to say that this is fantastic and this is perfect. This is an improvement. Without any shadow of a doubt, it's an improvement. But the devil is always in the detail. And the key point really is going back on what happens with this MUA loan. The Treasury has to remove and lower its costs to Manx Gas. I said to you all along, the gas consumers should be entitled to a discount of 20% on their bills coming through the doors. We were promised in press releases 12.9%. But I promise you, Paul, and I promise anyone who watches this video, including the 1,900 people in our group, that if Treasury do not promise and to immediately remove some of their costs and charges to Manx Gas, we will not come anywhere near that 12.9%. And then, unfortunately, everything that I've spoken to you about over the last 4 or 5 years pretty much becomes a failure.
It is that long, isn't it?
It is.
Well, maybe we'll be talking again, see what happens this week. I mean, you certainly pushed through a few guns over the bow there.
I have, Paul. It's really complicated. Normally we come down here and I come down here and we talk about this, and we have a little bit of a laugh and a giggle while we do it because it's normally not too complicated. But now it's come to the crucial point. In many ways, I'm possibly getting out of my depth here. I put my hands up and say, do you know what? Maybe I am. But if I'm out of my depth, who else is out of their depth? I don't have a vote. But I would like to think to myself, after 5 years, I'd at least be entitled to think to myself that if I had a vote, which way would I vote? On the basis of the information that I have, and more importantly, of the information that I haven't got, which is what would be included in that imposed regulatory route. If I had a vote next Tuesday, after much ado, I would vote to go down the imposed regulation route.